Okay, so the subject we're going to talk about today is China's rising sea power and the 21st century maritime Silk Road. And at the beginning, I would like to show you a short video. It will spend about 50 minutes, but it can help us to review the context of China's sea power development. So let's take a look first. I think this short video can help us to understand the idea of the sea power and what China think. So according to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, we can easily divide the marine space into several sections based on the proximity to the national territories, including the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, and the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ. And the power and the rights that country can exercise in those sections are basically different. As a sea power country and hegemony today, the United States has always attached great importance to the security and the freedom of the international marine space. And therefore, the White House wants to propose the idea of freedom navigation program in 1979 to resist other countries' excessive maritime plans, which means when certain countries' plan of the range in marine space that covered by its sovereignty against international law, the U.S. government will send the Navy troops, the fleets, to sail in the disputed water to deny the plan by taking some actual operations. So China, as you just watched in that short video, China is one of the most powerful competitor to of the sea power to the United States today. The U.S. government has noticed that China has dedicated to strengthen its naval power in past few decades and gradually expand its control over the surrounding waters. So there's a lot of scholars and think tanks in the United States have presented the research reports about China's rising sea power. But if you look back history, you will see that, interestingly, although China is a big country and has a very, very long coastline, but in history, China never become a great sea power like Britain. And in fact, the Qing dynasty wants to try to establish the modern navy after 1888. However, it has been forced to give up this goal because of the failure in the war with Japan. You may have heard before the Jiawu. Yeah, Jiawu War. And the PRC, the People's Republic of China, which founded in 1949, it seems has almost no obvious ambitions in the marine space in the early period, at least. For example, the Mao Zedong administration wants to take the idea of near-shore defense as the goal of its navy development, which means all the things that China wants is trying to prevent the enemy from invading China's homeland through the marine space. So the question is why China didn't become a great sea power like Britain in history. And I think there is three possible reasons. The first is about the economy. So if we look back history, China's economy has always based on the agriculture. So there has almost no obvious economic necessity can push China to explore the marine space or the maritime resources. And second is also about the economy. China is not only the big country, but also rich in natural resources. So it doesn't have to trade with other countries through the marine space, just like Britain or Spain. And the third reason is about security. In history, almost all the external threats to China are almost from the nomads in the north. So, which means the Chinese government doesn't have to worry about the maritime security issues. So, what I mean is, in history, China almost never has a chance to establish a positive cycle of sea power in history. The cycle means a country which obtain a great commercial interest from maritime trade and spend it on building navy for the consideration of protecting the shipping safety or expanding the scale of trade, then it can obtain even more commercial interest in the future. So that's something that China never did in history. However, things changed after 1978. China started to build its national sea power very actively after 1978 under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping. And the relevant efforts of the Chinese government include 3 points. First, in terms of the governance, the Chinese government has established the state oceanic administration to manage the surrounding waters and made various regulations about the maritime affairs. And Beijing also proposed many projects to develop the maritime economy and exploring the resources like the oil and natural gas in marine space. And meanwhile, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, also has strengthened the naval force and adjust its strategic goal from the near-shore defense to the near-sea defense, and which means China will try to prevent its competitor from entering its territorial sea and surrounding waters. So the explanation for those changes is because after 1978, China has entered the time of reform and openness. In Mandarins, we call that 改革开放. So in this period, China started to purchase a large number of the raw materials and energies from other countries and ship them back for manufacturing products. Then China will sell those products to those rich countries like the United States, the Western European countries, and Japan to obtain profits. So this manufacturing-based economic model is highly dependent on shipping. So that forced the Chinese government attach more importance to the development of its sea power. Well, unfortunately, China's sea power development has faced various obstacles because it has many unresolved maritime territorial disputes with its neighboring countries. For example, the Diaoyu Islands dispute in the East China Sea with Taiwan and Japan, or the even more complicated disputes in the South China Sea with some ASEAN countries. However, the Chinese government seems tend to use the long-term diplomatic negotiation instead of military conflicts to deal with those problems, since it believes the highly growing economy will increase China's strategic advantage. So here, there's no need to rush to solve these disputes immediately. China can wait. And at the same time, the Chinese government has dedicated to promoting the cross-national economic cooperation with its neighboring countries because it believes the growth of the interdependence can also create some leverage for China in the subsequent negotiation. So that's the political picture that describes China just looked like a cute panda to face its opponents in those disputes. However, China's policy attitude has changed after 2010 and it started to confront with those countries, Japan, some ASEAN countries, with some aggressive tactics. So the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, also launched a lot of military exercise in those disputed waters. So some media has indicated that China has changed from a cute panda to a dangerous dragon. And this strange phenomenon is actually related to the U.S. foreign policy, which is we just mentioned last week. Before 2010, the U.S. government was focused on the global war on terror in the Middle East. And that makes China feel the diplomatic pressure has been reduced, and it can solve those territorial disputes gradually by peaceful means. However, the Obama administration has promoted the participation in Asia-Pacific again after it proposed the idea of rebalancing strategy in 2010. So after 2010, you can see the U.S. government chose to interfere in those disputes surrounding China and support China's opponents like Vietnam, Japan, and the Philippines. So that makes the Chinese government started to worry about maybe those disputed waters and islands will be occupied by those countries permanently. So China decided to use some much more tough or aggressive tactics to confront with those countries directly. But at the same time, the Chinese government still proposed a brand new cooperative initiative named Maritime Silk Road. It tried to promote the economic cooperation and common interest with other countries in order to ease the diplomatic atmosphere and extend its influence. So now we can see what China did in the maritime dispute around it in past few years. As we just mentioned, there are two major maritime territorial disputes around China, and the first one is the Diaoyu Islands issues. In fact, China called that Diaoyu Islands, and Taiwan called those islands Diaoyu-Tai, and the Japanese government called those islands Senkaku Islands. So, I don't know, the different name was the same islands. Yeah. The Diaoyu Island dispute is in the East China Sea and related to China, Japan, and Taiwan. And due to the U.S.-Japan alliance system, so the U.S. government also involved in this dispute. So we know the geographical area of Diaoyu-Tai Island is very, very small, but those islands still very important, not only because of the strategic significance, but also because of the oil and natural gas in water around it. So here is the Diaoyu Island. It's very close to Taiwan, the Yilan County is right here. Okay, the dispute in the South China Sea is much more, even more complicated, almost, at least for ASEAN countries has claimed the sovereignty over some, different waters and islands. Just like the map, you can see Vietnam and Malaysia, the Philippines, and maybe Indonesia or Brunei. They all have their claim. However, China, in fact, in Taiwan, has claimed sovereignty over the entire South China Sea, the Red Line. So that makes the dispute become unavoidable. So interestingly, China's claim is actually from Taiwan, from the Republic of China, 中华民国 ROC government. In 1946, when ROC government still ruling the mainland China, it used to propose an official territorial map of the South China Sea to claim the sovereignty over the entire sea. So just right there, here's the line covered the entire South China Sea. So when the People's Republic of China has founded in 1949, so it decided to inherit this claim. Okay, so the strategy that China has used in the maritime territorial disputes in past few years, the first strategy is claiming sovereignty more actively, especially about those disputed islands and waters. There's an obvious signal is that China has proposed an official map of the South China Sea, right side this picture. This map is China proposed to the UN Assembly in 2009. And that is the first time the Chinese government tried to plan its sovereign status in South China Sea by publishing the official policy documents, although its claim is obviously inconsistent to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Okay, the other strategy China used very interesting is called reactive assertiveness strategy. Considering there are some countries, for example, the United States or Japan, still regard China as a important threat to the international security. So the Chinese government, when they deal with those territorial disputes, they are very careful. So they has adopted the reactive assertiveness strategy, which means China will just stay right there and do nothing, be patient, just wait. Wait other country make mistake first. Wait those countries provoke first. Then China will counterattack disproportionately. So that means China can eventually attack its opponents publicly and avoid the criticism from other countries. So let me give you an example. In April 2012, when China's fishing boats has been driven out the South China Sea by the Philippines warships, the Chinese government almost immediately sent a large number of the sea police fleets to confront and eventually force the Philippines government to give in. The same thing happened between China and Vietnam in 2014, when the Vietnam sea police tried to prevent few Chinese boats from their oil companies to enter the South China Sea. They also encountered the disproportionate counterattack. And the third thing that China has did is promoting its military presence in those disputed water. For example, in the South China Sea, China has tried to expand those disputed water and islands under its controls by artificial reclamation. So here is the same island in 2011 and 2014. So you can see the island is obviously become bigger. So China can station its troops or missiles or deploy the missiles out there. Yeah. And in the East China Sea, China, considering those Diaoyu Islands still under the control of Japan, so the Chinese government has built a lot of artificial platform in the waters around the Diaoyu Islands in the name of exploring oil and natural gas. Just right there, the red dot on the map. Yeah. So Chinese government announced that they claim those platforms is all for the to explore the oil and natural gas. However, there are some Japanese scholars that has pointed out, technically those platforms are too big. Those platforms, in fact, they are big enough to deploy drones and military radar out there. So they have some strategic meaning. And at the same time, China has kept to increase the number of the military exercise and cruises in the disputed water. And For example, in the map, you can see the numbers of those sail, the cruises, and exercise around the Diaoyu Islands is obviously rise after 2012. And at the same time, China has kept to strengthen its naval powers. For example, the East Sea fleets and the South Sea fleets of the PLA has already gained more than 50 brand new warships in the past 5 years. And China also has the largest sea police fleet in East Asia. And the first strategy is about demonstrating the governance to those disputed water. For example, the Chinese government has proposed some welfare policy to encourage its citizens to move to those disputed islands in the sea or travel there. For example, if Chinese people would like to have a wedding in the South China Sea on those islands, then you will get the financial support by the government. So China is trying to do those things to showing that it can actually control those islands. And besides, China also support its fishermen to go fishing in the South China Sea. And in fact, this situation has caused some impact to its neighboring countries like Philippines or other ASEAN countries. Okay, before we continue to discuss about those situations, I think we can take a 5 minutes break first. So we just mentioned that the Chinese government has proposed some social welfare policy to encourage people to move to the South China Sea islands or travel there, and encourage China's and Chinese fishermen to go fishing in those disputed waters. And those policy has caused some troubles to its neighboring countries, especially Philippines. So the fifth and the last strategy that China used in those territorial disputes is the economic tools. China has applied the economic pressure on its opponents in those maritime territorial disputes. For example, the Chinese government wants to threaten Japan to stop the export of the rare earth. Do you know what's rare earth? I think it's okay to explain in Chinese. 稀土. And it's a very important resource to make some digital products, for example, the mobile phone, the notebook, or iPad. And China, most of the rare earths today is from China. So China wants to threaten Japan to stop export those resources to Japan because they have some argument about the Diaoyu Islands. But at the same time, the Chinese government continues to provide substantial economic assistance to some ASEAN countries, especially the countries are not involved in the South China Sea disputes, for example, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma, in order to prevent those countries from supporting Vietnam and the Philippines in the South China Sea dispute. So also, the Chinese government has expressed much more aggressive attitude in those territorial disputes in the past few years, but it's still trying to show the goodwill to the international community by proposing the idea of the Maritime Silk Road Initiative. So the One Belt, One Road initiative that proposed by President Xi Jinping in 2013 is actually composed of two major sections, the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. The Chinese government announced that the One Belt, One Road initiative will promote the economic cooperation, policy coordination, the mutual trust, and traffic connection between China and all the countries on the path of the Belt and Road. So in China's imagination, the successful implementation of this Belt and Road Initiative will effectively accelerate the process of regional integration of the Eurasian continent and improve the traffic efficiency. And more importantly, China's diplomatic and economic power will be greatly increased. And the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road Initiative has received a lot of attention from the international community. The path of this initiative is start from the South China Sea and into the Indian Ocean and into the Mediterranean right here. So it not only reflects the ambitions of China to develop the sea power. You can see the Chinese government also want to extend its diplomatic influence into the Southeast Asia, South Asia, East Africa, or even the Southern Europe through this initiative. So from the perspective of international politics, we can say this initiative has three important meanings. The first meaning is about avoiding the strategic pressure from the United States. As we mentioned before, that China's sea power development has faced various obstacles. Besides the above territorial disputes we just mentioned in the East and South China Sea, the most of the pressure is from the United States. The U.S. audience system we had introduced last week. The U.S. audience with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Australia, and the U.S. Army in South Korea and Japan. Those things have all limited the prospects of China's maritime expansion. However, the path of the 21st century maritime Silk Road is from the east to the west, so which perfectly avoids the pressure from the United States. In fact, except the possible resistance from India, China has almost no powerful challengers on this path. You can see the map. In fact, India is the only potential challengers to China in this path. The second meaning is about the protecting shipping safety. As the short video we just watched at the beginning of this class, over the past few decades, the Chinese strategists has always worried about the potential security threats that posed by the Malacca dilemma. Since most of China's overseas energy and raw materials are all transported by shipping through the Malacca Strait. I think it's right here, close to Malaysia and Singapore. And so, the Chinese government is worried that maybe someday China's enemy will blockade the strait, and that will cause the serious damage to the China's economy and the social stability. So, considering this, the path of 21st century maritime Silk Road has just covered this the Malacca Strait. So, the implementation of One Belt One Road initiative can indirectly promote China's shipping safety in the future. Okay, the third important meaning is in terms of the international politics and about strategic preponderance, which means is the implementation of the 21st century maritime Silk Road can help China to gain some important preponderance. First, in terms of the security, during the process of building this maritime Silk Road, China has signed lots of the contracts and agreements about the port construction with some South Asian countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. So at the same time, you can see the People's Liberation Army (PLA) also established its first overseas military base in East Africa. So if China can use those strongholds wisely in the future, we can expect that the operational capability of PLA Navy will be in this region, Indo-Pacific, will be greatly increased. And the other one is about the economy. China has signed a lot of the commercial agreement and economic contract with the South Asian countries, and considering the prospects of the regional development of South Asia is cheerful. So, which means that China could, obtain substantial profits from the future economic growth of South Asia, and continue to strengthen its diplomatic influence right there. However, the Maritime Silk Road has also faced various challenges in its implementation. The first problem is the resistance from the United States and India. You can imagine that, of course, the US government will not happy about to see this One Belt One Road initiative and China's expansion of its sea power. So after 2017, when the President Donald Trump proposed the idea of the Indo-Pacific strategy, the United States government, the Pentagon, has reached with the Indian government, and they already signed some agreement of the military cooperation, and of course those agreements is all for the prevent China to expand its military or diplomatic influence in South Asia. And the second one is about the criticism of the economic colonization from the international community. If you look at the newspapers or other media like the New York Times or the Washington Post, the BBC, those media and some experts are all accused China. China's Belt and Road initiative is actually debt trap diplomacy, which means China is basically, those experts say China is gradually control some middle or small sized country on the path of Belt and Road, just like Sri Lanka and Maldives. What China did is China is very generous. China provide a lot of economic assistance to those countries. China provide long-term loans to those countries, and gradually control the economic system in Maldives and Sri Lanka. So some say the Belt and Road initiative is actually a new type, a new pattern of colonization. And the last challenge to China in the process to building the Maritime Silk Road is the threats, potential threats from terror attack. The terror attack is always focused on some certain target, especially the transportational system, like the high-speed rail or airport. The place that people will use every day, so you attack there, you can create some news infections. So, however, the traffic infrastructure is exactly what China is going to build in the framework of the One Belt One Road initiative. So, when China has built a lot of ports, airports in South Asian countries, and we know the terrorism still exists in the countries like Pakistan or India. So how to deal with the potential threats from the terror attack? That is something the Chinese government has to consider seriously in the future. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about today.